Hello students, welcome to class. Our topic for today is contract of employment. In this class, we'll be discussing the definition of employer and employee. We'll also be looking at duties of the employer and employee and the right of the employer and employee. Now let's start by defining employer. Employer can be defined as a person or an institution that hires or provides job opportunity for another person called employee for an agreed remuneration. The employer can hire anybody he pleases and relieve any of his employees of work if they behave contrary to the laid down rules and regulations of the organization. So what are the duties of an employer? They are: 1. Provision of safe place for work. The employer must be able to provide a good and safe place for his or her workers to carry out their duties appropriately. 2. Job security. The employer must provide adequate job security. He must assure the employees that their employment is permanent. 3. He must accept responsibility for personal injury. The employer must accept responsibility for injuries sustained by an employee during the course of carrying out their obligation. We also have provision of necessary tools and equipment. The employer must provide all necessary tools and equipment for proper execution of his employees' duties. Next, we have he must indemnify his employees. The employer must indemnify or compensate his employees against any loss arising from the proper performance of their duties. Lastly, we have provision of training facilities. The employer must provide training facilities as well as incentives to motivate his employees. Having known the duties of employer, what are the rights of the employer? 1. Right to fixed remuneration. The employer has the right to fix wages and salaries of his employees. 2. Right to relieve employee of his job. The employer can terminate the appointment of his employee after giving due notice. 3. Right to use invention of employee. The employer has every right to make use of anything invented by the employee with his facilities, and more especially during the working period. Lastly for this class, right to hire and employ anybody. The employer has the right to hire whosoever he pleases without being questioned. Now let's move on to the employee. The employee is someone who agrees to perform services to an employer in exchange for payment of an agreed remuneration. The employee works for another person called the employer for an agreed sum of money and is accountable to his employer. So what are the duties of the employee? We have 1. He must serve faithfully and honestly. His or her interest must not conflict with the interest of his or her employer. 2. Exercise good faith. The employee has a duty to act in good faith when discharging his or her duties. 3. Must not delegate his duties. The employee is not to delegate the performance of his duties to another person without the authority of the employer. And lastly for this class, the employee must obey orders and instructions given by the employers. And lastly, let's take a look at the right of employee. We have 1. They have the right to reject or accept an offer. 2. The employee have the right to annual leave. 3. The employee has the right to receive the agreed remuneration. Lastly for this class, the employee has the right to receive compensation for loss. Before we go, let's take a quick exercise. Question 1. Highlight the difference between an employer and an employee. Question 2. Mention the duties of an employer. Question 3. What are the rights of the employer? Question 4. Outline the duties of an employee. And question 5. List 5 rights an employee enjoys in a company. With this, we've come to the end of this lesson. Thank you for joining us. See you in our next class. Bye bye.